Overweight but in good health. Donald Trump's doctor says the presidential candidate's in very good condition. The revelation came as his rival Hillary Clinton was put under pressure to cough up her medical records after taking a turn during the 9/11 memorial. Also ahead, doping data leak. Olympic athletes defend their use of banned substances after Russian hackers crack into anti-doping agencies' files. We'll examine the fallout from the biggest stories of the past 7 days. This is Insight Review. Welcome to Insight Review, our look back at the stories that have dominated the headlines for the past week. Libya legacy. A UK parliamentary report takes aim at Britain and France for intervening in the fight to topple Gaddafi. Plus, not at risk. The head of the European Commission claims Brexit doesn't mean the end of the EU. We'll examine those with our guest, the author, Yasmin Alibhai-Brown, and the broadcaster, Lucy Beresford. But first, here's what you need to know about what happened this week. 7 days in 60 seconds. After days of speculation, Hillary Clinton's doctor said she is fit to be president. A passerby filmed her stumbling when she left a 9/11 memorial event last weekend. China and Russia began 8 days of naval exercises in the South China Sea. The drills include defense, rescue, anti-submarine operations and island seizing. Colombia's FARC rebels apologized for the great pain they caused by kidnapping thousands of people to finance 50 years of conflict. FARC promised not to do it again. The UK approved the construction of a new nuclear power plant by a French company with the help of Chinese funding. The deal's worth $24 billion. A report criticised the UK's 2011 military intervention in Libya, claiming it was based on flawed intelligence and wrong assumptions. Barack Obama said America is ready to lift sanctions against Myanmar. The US president made the announcement when he met the country's leader, Aung San Suu Kyi, in Washington on Wednesday. And US Air Force bombers flew over South Korea in a show of force and support for America's ally. The flyby was in response to North Korea's fifth and most powerful nuclear test. So first this week, Hillary Clinton cancelled her campaign trip to California after her doctor revealed the presidential candidate had pneumonia. She was filmed stumbling after leaving a 9/11 memorial last weekend, bringing attention to a long-standing Republican theory that she is unwell. However, on Wednesday, her doctor declared she'd made a full recovery, and on Thursday, she was back on the campaign trail in North Carolina. Meanwhile, her rival presidential candidate, Donald Trump, used suspicions over Clinton's health to boost his own campaign. The Republican candidate appeared on a talk show in the United States where he discussed his own health.
I have it right here. I mean, should I do it? I don't care. Should I do it? It's two letters. One is the report, and the other is from Lenox Hill Hospital.
Yeah, may I see them?
Saying, yeah, sure.
So these are the report.
Those were all the tests that were just done. Just about the same age as Ronald Reagan, and Hillary's a year behind me. I would say, just based on my life. I mean, I actually, and I don't know if this makes sense, I feel as good today as I did when I was 30.
Well, I'm joined in the studio now by the author, Yasmin Alibhai-Brown, and the broadcaster, Lucy Beresford. You're both very welcome. Yasmin, you go first. How damaged do you think Hillary is by this sickness episode?
I don't know, but if she is, it just tells you so much, doesn't it, about the American electorate, and actually about the electorate at the moment almost everywhere in the world. There have been umpteen male leaders, actually, who have often, Kennedy was one of them. Kennedy used to have to take, I don't know how many injections a day to do what he had to do. Gordon Brown had real problems with his eyes. And Churchill had the most extraordinary range of illnesses. It seems to me that, we've entered this vicious new world where the electorate thinks they have the right to walk into your bedroom now and look at every bit of you. And also, she's a woman. I do have to say, She's a woman.
I was going to ask
She's
you
a woman.
as to whether or not this, of course, is good politics. It's an election season.
It's not good politics.
And it is,
It's
well,
not good
they would
politics.
say it's good politics, her critics would. But is there also, as part of a component, some underlying sexism here?
Yes.
That she is under even more scrutiny because she is a woman?
Absolutely, absolutely. There are lots of things I criticize about Hillary Clinton. I'm not personally kind of moved by her personality and so on. But honestly, the way she has been treated, interestingly, in contrast to the way our Prime Minister was not treated for being a woman, is so clear to me, so clear to me.
I think that's a really interesting point because, of course, we do have a female Prime Minister and we've already had one, so it's almost like we're used to that. I think it is partly politics.
Theresa May, the UK Prime Minister.
Theresa May, UK Prime Minister, hasn't been actually elected. There are other aspects to her sort of rise to power that one could dissect, but the fact that she was female didn't really seem to get that much attention.
And
Okay,
remember,
let's
she's a diabetic.
So she has,
Indeed.
she has a medical condition.
Yeah.
Yes, John F. Kennedy had Addison's disease. Churchill had depression. Having an illness per se doesn't necessarily disqualify you from either.
No, does not necessarily. But look, it plays into another narrative here. The fact the doctor knew she had pneumonia, the fact he kept it from even some of her closest advisors on the team. Why do you think they did that when it plays into a narrative, which Donald Trump peddles all the time, that she's a liar?
Yes.
She's got Benghazi.
Or that she's economical with the
truth. She's got the emails fiasco to deal with. So it's not a very good thing.
My concern is that, that's right, I think it's that dimension to it which is more damaging to her, because I think we all recognise that all human beings get ill. I agree that it's extremely disingenuous to imagine that, you know, somebody could have that information and that because it exists, somehow we as the electorate ought to be privy to it. But I think an overall narrative that this is possibly somebody who is disingenuous or who has been economical with the truth is more damaging. And all of these sort of papers flying around with Donald Trump sort of getting his, I wonder, do you need me to have a little piece of paper to show you to prove that I'm valid to actually commentate? It's disturbing to think that it's that level of scrutiny, which unfortunately is what is so off-putting to people around the world going into politics.
But I also think that could it be, you know, her reluctance to say, look, I'm ill, I need to take some time off, is because she really is so frightened of, that would have unleashed yet another kind of assault on her. She's not fit. She's got pneumonia. It's an old person's disease. You know, all this kind of thing.
But from a PR perspective, maybe get the news out there, you control the agenda.
Yeah.
I mean, that's an old mantra. I would have thought it might have been better, with the value of hindsight, of course, in this case. But look, it's interesting that the electorate affected may be short-term, but these polls, which were several points apart, have now narrowed.
Yeah.
It's neck and neck, even in some of the swing states where Mrs. Clinton had a big lead.
That happened before this illness.
Well, I think it's been exaggerated, hasn't it? That tightening of the polls has been exaggerated
going on for a
as a
while.
result of the last Sunday's 9/11 stumble.
So much about politics, though, is that gut feel. So there are so many people who aren't swayed by these revelations at all. They have their instinct as to who they're going to vote for, that ultimately you're always going to be targeting those swing voters and how ill health plays. And I think Yasmin is absolutely right. If this was a man who was the same age as Hillary, who had this revelation, you wouldn't necessarily panic.
Took the weekend off for the flu. Do you think you'd be judged as harshly?
Exactly. It's about that the narrative about female and vulnerability, and are they up to the job?
And remember, Trump has been so sexist all the way through, to the point of being disgusting to a female interviewer.
Yeah, but that's part of his appeal, clearly.
Oh,
Let's
God.
move on. Right, next, we're going to talk about Britain and France, who were criticised this week for their intervention in Libya, which led to the overthrow of Muammar Gaddafi in 2011. A British parliamentary report accused the then British Prime Minister, David Cameron, of lacking a coherent strategy for the air campaign. It said the intervention was based on flawed intelligence and wrong assumptions, and that it led to the rise of Daesh in North Africa. Britain and France led an international coalition of air and missile strikes against Gaddafi's forces after the regime threatened to attack the rebel-held city of Benghazi. Well, Yasmin and Lucy are still with us. Lucy, hindsight is a wonderful thing. Do you think this report reveals that actually they didn't think enough before acting in this case?
I'm slightly concerned by this report because even though it comes up with conclusions and it lays most of the blame at the door of David Cameron, who of course was leader at the time, in geopolitical situations, you never really know what is the right thing to do. There are kind of worse options and bad options. And if you look at what's happening in Syria, we haven't intervened until very lately. That is a mess. In Iraq, we went full tilt, and that is a mess. And one might argue that in Libya, we kind of went in only half-heartedly, and that is a mess as well. So I'm completely understanding of the fact that global leaders, they're damned if they do and damned if they don't. Nevertheless, there were definitely, the leader of MI6, which is the British intelligence agency, he was making reservations quite publicly about what was the future, what planning had gone into that the after blockade and after. What could they actually say to that? Because nobody knows what the unknown will be in the future.
And Yasmin, the French were very keen to act, weren't they? And almost dragged David Cameron along in their tail.
And they were gung-ho, including the French intelligentsia. It's like, I think it was I mean, again, you know, they learned nothing from Iraq. They repeated exactly the same mistakes with Iraq. You know, they go in, they haven't got any planning afterwards. They leave the country in a shocking mess, and they're still dying every day, okay? And I do agree with Lucy that it's not easy for those who are in that place to make decisions, because you don't know how things are going to
But let's just work our way through.
But we should not go to war unless we know exactly why we're doing it.
Let me put you the exact situation here as they tell it, which was, it was a narrow brief. They were worried that Benghazi was going to turn into, let's look back to the Balkans, a Srebrenica-style massacre. Could they have that on their collective conscience? Could they do anything to try and preempt it? And I don't suppose they did work it through that would then lead to regime change. Was that their motivation all along?
Yes,
I don't know.
I think it
Do you think it was?
Certainly the French. Certainly the French.
They'd
but
had
also
enough.
this French, and again, this is, I'm sorry to sound so madly feminist, and I'm not always, but this one, again, it seems to me that men at a certain status of politics absolutely seem to need the validation of a war, except for Margaret Thatcher, who got it and did it very interestingly and well enough for it not to rebound on her with the Falklands. But I think France felt kind of left behind by America and the UK.
Do you think it was that cynical?
It was. I think it wasn't that simple.
Your advisor, you're the Prime Minister. Advisor tells you...
I would certainly not say.
300,000 people are going to die in a city and you could stop it.
But if we were the advisors, we wouldn't.
You wouldn't?
No, and I do agree with Yasmin that sort of testosterone-fueled environment where it's almost a sort of a badge of honour to be able to say, this is what I've done. The problem is, and this isn't necessarily a criticism of the media per se, but certainly even just members of the public, if you tell them what the situation is, there is this awful problem in Syria, there's this awful problem in Libya, eventually what people will say is something must be done. Yes. They don't know what that something will need to be. And so it is left to the people in charge to come up with that something.
But it's the worst possible rationale, as history seems to be proving, isn't it? OK, thank you for that. Still to come on Insight Review, the Russian hackers who've stolen the confidential medical records of some of the world's top Olympic athletes.